Hi, everyone. My name is Luis Guerra. I'm here with the United Farm Workers Foundation. Our mission at the United Farm Workers Foundation is to open the doors of opportunity for working people in their communities. We really envision a clear path to social integration and civic participation for immigrants and their children. So this topic of immigration and where it unites with health is a huge topic for us. Particularly our service centers are in very heavy agricultural areas, and we see immigration status as a social determinant of health. Like if you don't have immigration status, your health is gonna suffer. Whether it be directly because your stress level is high, or anxiety, or indirectly because you just don't have access to benefits and services. So that being said, my goal in the next section of today's discussion is to catch you up to speed on what's going on in the immigration world and talk to you about why that matters in California, and then talk a little bit about what strategies are being used to get ready for large-scale immigration programs that could help over 5 million undocumented individuals across the nation. No one has ever encountered a situation like the one that we're anticipating, so there's a lot of great work happening that I hope to share with you today on the implementation efforts. And then I'll make sure to end it with why are we here in this gorgeous building with the California State Library? It's because it's going to require more than your typical players. It can't just continue to be immigration legal service providers in order to spread the word and help people. It's gonna require a top-down strategy as well as a grassroots strategy. So just giving a quick recap, immigration reform, CIR, comprehensive immigration reform, has been for over a decade been pushed at a federal level. It has stalled. There has been recent efforts where we as immigration advocates had some momentum to actually move legislation with a pathway to citizenship, but all in all, we haven't been successful. Like many other efforts have stalled in DC, but we continue to advocate that there needs to be some sort of solution for estimated 11 million undocumented individuals that are in our communities. And that number is nationwide. So that being said, the Obama administration created what we call administrative relief. It's also an executive action, so you'll hear me use terms throughout my presentation. If I refer to the administrative relief programs, I'm talking about the programs that he created through executive action or executive order. On June 15, 2012, he created the program called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. The acronym that's used for that program is called DACA. And most people know this. This particular program, I'll go into the eligibility requirements, but it targets, typically younger folks. Their common term that's used to describe them are dreamers. That's because a lot of the eligibility criteria that was used to craft this executive order came from a piece of legislation called the DREAM Act. A lot of people call it the DREAM Act, and we have to educate our communities that no, this is not legislation. It does not provide a pathway to citizenship. And we still want the DREAM Act to pass through Congress and be signed into law, but it's not the DREAM Act. It does benefit a lot of dreamers, however, so you'll hear in the community, you'll hear it called the DREAM Act. On November 20th, 2014, more recently, President Obama, since he saw that CIR wasn't going to happen, his term as president is ending, he noticed there's a lot of people that got left out of the original DACA program. So he expanded that criteria to include more people. We call that expanded DACA. I'll also go over the criteria for that. And then the big program where we're expecting millions of people, most of the people to qualify, is called the Deferred Action for Parents of Americans, commonly referred as DAPA. So for that program, we estimate 5 million, actually for combined expanded DACA and Deferred Action for Parents of Americans, we estimate that over 5 million undocumented individuals could benefit across the nation once those programs are implemented. These programs are currently in the Supreme Court of the United States, and I'll talk a little bit about what's happening with that. So Texas and 25 other states filed a lawsuit challenging the DAPA and expanded DACA programs. On February 2015, a federal district court put DAPA and expanded DACA on hold. We were actually just one day away from going out into our communities and having individuals benefit from expanded DACA, but unfortunately we weren't able to do so. So on November 9th, 2015, a divided panel on the Fifth Circuit issued a decision that affirmed the federal district's court order and continued to block the programs. So most recently, the Supreme Court took the case, which we're very excited about as immigration advocates. We do believe that the president acted under his power and didn't. The main arguments are two: one, that he extended his powers, he overreached, and two, that the states are the 26 states that are filing the lawsuit are saying that the costs are going to outweigh the benefits, so that this is going to be a costly program due to giving out driver's license or auxiliary services. So we are still moving forward. We can't wait for the Supreme Court to make up its mind and then start preparing for it. Like I said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime maybe opportunity for many of us to help our communities, so we're continuing to prepare and implement. It's important to note that everything that's happening in the Supreme Court does not affect the initial DACA program that started in 2012. So there's a lot of confusion in our communities. Every time this gets brought up, Univision is one of the main sources of information for our Latino communities, a Spanish television station. And every time there's, anytime immigration comes up in the news, our phones just go off the wall. Like we plan out for these types of things. And I know this is the case for a lot of organizations that work with the immigrant community. I want to take a little bit of a step back. So now that we have a context of where we're at, so the administrative relief programs, I just want to highlight their deferred action programs. So they're deferring deportation. That's essentially what they're doing there. So an immigrant's coming forward, if they have this certain criteria, they submit an application, and they're telling the government, I'm here, I meet this criteria, here's my evidence, please don't deport me. That's essentially all that's happening in the process, and the benefit is that they get a social security number and a work authorization. So a lot of people are willing to take that risk, and quote unquote, coming out of the shadows and get access to work authorization. Once again, the existing program is called DACA, and the new proposed programs are DAPA and expanded DACA. So a little bit about numbers, what this means to California. California is going to be the state with the largest number of beneficiaries. So if we use, on the chart right here, you see the numbers broken down. If we just count the original DACAs at 343,000, expanded DACA would give us an additional 93,000 individuals, and DAPA is over 1 million individuals. So all these three programs together, we're talking about 1.5 million individuals that could potentially get relief from deportation and be further integrated into our communities. This number gives us 50% of the undocumented estimated population in California. We hope will be eligible for any of these deferred action programs. Just to break down the estimates on the undocumented population in California, up here you have the top 5 communities based by top countries of birth. I would like to point out, everyone always assumes that Mexico is the first one, rightly so, it is. But one challenge that we're gonna have with these programs is there's a huge diversity of immigrant communities. I mean, these are just the top countries, but once you go past underneath China, I mean, they're all about the same. And you're talking about, different languages. They might be from the same country, but even within Mexico, we have our own challenges because a lot of these numbers are going to include indigenous communities that Spanish might not be their first language. So I'll talk a little bit more about challenges in a sec, but just to keep that in mind. This diagram kind of breaks down the major regions, the numbers by the major regions. So on a nonprofit level, a lot of us have organized ourselves into a coalition called Ready California. Ready California's mission is to make California as prepared as possible for the implementation of these programs. So what you see, the color codes that you see up here on the chart, we divided up into these major regions. So we have the North Coast, the Bay Area, Central Coast, South Coast, LA, Orange County, San Diego Imperial, Inland Empire, Southern San Joaquin, Northern San Joaquin, and Northern Valley. This is really where most immigrants are going to be, that benefit for these programs will be found. Unfortunately, you'll see these gray areas. We just don't currently have the infrastructure. There's not a lot of services out here, and we're thinking of being creative, using technology, using mobile strategies to reach those communities. I would also like to point out, if you take the top 10 agricultural counties in California, just the top 10, and then you divide that from urban California. So let's imagine that there's urban California, that's a state by itself, so that would be all the major cities. And then there's rural California, and that becomes a state by itself. And then you put them in order comparing all the other 50 states, rural California would be number 4 on that list. So you would have urban California, Texas, Illinois, and then you would have rural California. So that at the United Farm Workers Foundation, since we really focus a lot of our energy in rural communities and agricultural communities, we're doing everything that we can to find partners like libraries, unions, schools, whoever we can find, because we know we have a big challenge up ahead. So that's a fact that I always like to share with folks. So I'm just going to share some of the criteria with you. Don't feel overwhelmed with all these legal terms and requirements. There's a sign-in sheet that you just make sure you're signed up on that sheet that's being passed around, and we'll send you the slides. But just so you know, the initial DACA program that was announced on June 15, 2012, most of these programs have some similarities, but there's a few differences. So the main things to point out for the initial DACA program is that there's an age cap. So you have to have been under the age of 31 as of June 15, 2012, when President Obama made the announcement. You also have to prove that you came to the US before reaching your 16th birthday. So that really leaves out a lot of the older community that came after their 16th birthday. You have to prove that you've been continuously residing in the US since June 15, 2007. We'll talk a little bit about how the community proves these things. But essentially, we need to find evidence from June 15, 2007 up until today or whenever they file. A really hard one for our communities is they have to prove they were physically present in the US and out of status on the day of the announcement. So as advocates, we need to help them find something, ideally something with that date, June 15, 2012, or as close as possible to that date, because we have to prove they were here and they weren't in another country or left. Another big obstacle to this program that communities face is their is an education requirement. So they have to prove they were currently in school or have graduated from school, they obtained a GED, or have been honorably discharged from the military. So this is another thing that we continue to educate our communities. There's this conception that you have to be a college graduate. That's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of flexibility in that last requirement, as long as you can prove you're enrolled in some sort of education program to better your life. Some of these benefits I already stated. So they get protection from deportation for 2 years. They get work authorization for 2 years. In addition, they're going to get a social security number, and in some states, like in our great state of California, they'll be able to have access to a driver's license. But once again, it doesn't give them permanent immigration status. It doesn't give them a pathway to citizenship. It's more like, we like to refer it to as like a Band-Aid solution, but we'll take whatever we have right now and go with it, because it changes lives. So the DAPA program. So this is Deferred Action for Parents of Americans and Lawful Permanent Residents. So what that means is that they're going to have to prove that they have at least one son or daughter who was a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident. Legal permanent resident just means green card holder, who was born on or before November 20th, 2014. Once again, that date is important because that's the date that President Obama announced the program. They're going to have to prove, once again, the continuous residence piece, that they've been living in the U.S. since before January 1st, 2010. They're going to have to prove that they were physically present in the U.S. and out of status on the date that President Obama made the announcement. And like all immigration programs, they can't be convicted of certain crimes or engaged in certain illegal activity. We do know that application costs will be $465. There won't be a waiver fee. So we're educating our communities and helping them, working with community banks, trying to figure out right now different strategies to help come up with these 465s. If you can imagine, a lot of our, particularly in farm worker communities, a lot of our communities are very low income, and there might be multiple family members that will apply for this program, so that quickly can add up. The benefits for DAPA are very similar to DACA. The only difference is instead of 2 years, it's for 3 years. Both the protection from deportation and the work authorization. But once again, DAPA won't give a pathway to citizenship or provide permanent immigration status. Lastly, because there are going to be a significant number of individuals that will benefit from the expanded criteria to DACA, these are the main differences. So the upper age limit to apply will be eliminated once expanded DACA goes through. If you remember, initial DACA had that age cap of 31 as of June 15, 2012. The dates of continuous residence will be switched from January 1st, 2010, when it used to be June 15, 2007. So that's roughly about 2.5, 3 years that they no longer have to come up with evidence for. And then since DACA currently is only good for 2 years, it's going to be switched to be for 3 years. So we continue. Unfortunately, there's a lot of unscrupulous agents out in our communities that are just waiting for immigration to pop up in the news and take advantage of a lot of our community. So we continue to educate them to not be victims of fraud, and remind them that there's a lot they can do to continue to get prepared, but there's no application process yet. And we are highly encouraging them to go to a lot of our communities have never been legally screened. They just assume they don't qualify for something because they try to analyze their own case. But with DACA program, there was a study done where actually roughly 15 to 20% of the individuals that came to a legal DACA screening, a lot of these young kids ended up benefiting for something better. and with a pathway to a green card and pathway to citizenship. So we're highly encouraging communities just go get screened right now. What's the worst that can happen? We can tell you, you may not qualify for anything now, but you might qualify for something better, or you can continue to get prepared. There's a great program called the Board of Immigration Appeals Recognition and Accreditation Program that it's administered by the Department of Justice at a federal level that allows non-attorneys to practice immigration law. At the United Farm Workers Foundation, we're the largest, the acronym is BIA, we're the largest BIA recognized and accredited staff in California and second largest in the nation. And we're highly encouraging other partners to really think about if they want to provide immigration legal services or just general consultations. This is an opportunity for nonprofits or other organizations that don't have attorneys on staff to get the training required to go through the process to be able to do it legally. We continue to tell our community to get prepared, and there's a lot of document gathering that they need to do. So once they're going to have to prove their identity. Unfortunately, there's a lot of issues here with some community members getting access to consular IDs. There may be errors in their birth certificate. So there's a lot of issues we can help them out through that right now. We're going to have to compile evidence that they were here in the U.S. since November 20th, 2014. So here's where we get creative. This may include library records, if the individual is a patron of the library. Anything that's an official document of any of the agencies they've interacted with that has their name and date and address is going to be helpful for us. So, the more official the document, the better. We're going to have to obviously prove that they have a son or daughter that's a U.S. citizen or permit legal resident, and then we're going to have to find proof that they were physically present on that date. So when we talk to agencies that may interface with immigrants but don't want to do the legal services route, there's a lot of help that they can do with the document collection side. So like I mentioned in the opening statement, we really see that the only way that we're going to be able to accomplish this is two-pronged. We need to increase our legal capacity. So when I talk about that, I'm talking about growing the number of reliable and trustworthy and affordable legal services that our communities have access to. One strategy to do that is to increase the number of BIA-recognized agencies and accredited representatives that we have across the state of California. And also increase the knowledge of those legal services staff already. There's a lot of our legal service staff across the state that work for nonprofits, but they're used to doing really simple, cookie cutter type cases and usually refer out harder cases to attorneys. Well, with such a huge volume, we're gonna have to train our legal staff to take a little bit more complex cases because in some places there just might not be anyone to refer them to. What we call nascent capacity or partnering organization capacity is increasing the number of agencies that serve as resources to our immigrant communities, such as libraries, unions, local government can play a role, schools. I know that one great example of schools taking initiative in LA, the LA school district created a process for their students to go request school records from their administration. That it was a form they filled out, it was streamlined, and I wish all schools would implement that because I at the time when DACA was being implemented, I was in Oregon, and my biggest issue was with schools. Dealing with school administrators not wanting to give me school records, or maybe they didn't have the staff required to go get the school records in the back room on the box, all these different issues that came out. So encourage agencies to think about how they'll be affected once these programs are implemented. We are using what we call community navigator strategy. We really stole this idea from the great work that's being done in the health field. the promotores or promotoras de salud. It's using those people that are actually affected or those people that are interact with the community and training them on Immigration 101 so that they can help the community with the process as much as possible, without delving into the legal advice. We always, so we're doing these across the nation along with other national partners, and we really see it complementing the top-down model because we think you need a grassroots strategy to go along with it. And then one other thing is I'm always encouraging organizations that haven't thought themselves as legal service providers to explore that route. If you're the only game in town in a very rural organization and you have the capacity to do so, I would highly encourage an organization in that scenario to consider providing immigration legal services. We're going to have a lot of challenges that we already know have been in the past. There's a lot of hard-to-reach populations. One of them is going to be our Asian community. 14% of the undocumented population is Asian, and knowing that we know there's a variety of languages within the Asian community, a variety of communities. The Asian community, unlike the Latino community, doesn't have such an open and friendly environment into being undocumented. So they challenge with, they're hearing messages from their own media talking down to immigrants, talking down about immigration and being undocumented. So it makes them less willing to come open and tell anyone that they're undocumented or that they're in this situation. For us, farm workers are very important. 1 in 6 individuals that will benefit from these programs are going to be farm workers or directly related to farm workers. So really thinking about, having our materials cover those main indigenous languages and have more visuals than lengthy, wordy presentations like the one I'm using today. And we know that DAPA is going to bring out, older populations. Something that we know from DACA is that we were able to use technology to an extent because it was your dreamer type, younger folks that were used to using technology, but we need to be creative when thinking about DAPA. So just to summarize some of the challenges, we want to prepare for low application rates, particularly from the Asian community. We're trying to figure out ways to combat that. Cost is going to be a challenge. I don't know if there's going to be a solution for that, but we should continue to strategize to see how we can make it more cost effective or can try to find ways to at least reduce the legal service cost, access to resources, like I said, compiling and gathering evidence. Many times individuals have all the eligibility criteria, but they just can't simply prove it because maybe, they just don't go out, or everything is under their husband name, or 5, 6 people live under the same household and nothing's under their name. So we anticipate these issues. And then geographic barriers. Some people just won't be able to access resources as easily. So what can our partners do? There's many things from a huge spectrum. They can be reliable sources of information. They can refer immigrants to local service providers. They can actually have their staff be trained in answering simple questions and just dispelling misinformation. They can help. A library, for example, could put together a workshop or an event where people bring in documents and librarians just help them compile them or organize them without saying that's going to be enough. It's more of just organizing it so that, they're ready, or helping them figure out what they might be missing. There's a lot of great DACA work that Miko will talk about, and naturalization work that individuals can be engaged in. And maybe once they delve into what's happening now, they'll consider doing something in the future once DAPA starts. And then once again, I probably sound like a broken record, but I would ask partners to consider if they can provide legal services through their non-attorney staff. So there's some great potential partnerships. This year, obviously, there's the election, so there's a big push for citizenship. to get our immigrant community civically engaged and just go out to the polls and vote. There's currently over 9 million immigrants across the country that are eligible to become citizens today, but there's many challenges and obstacles for them to getting that. But there's a huge need for both information and services. We're very grateful for the recent funding that was distributed from the state through the Department of Social Services for immigration services. We're one of the many grantees that currently is using that funding to provide free immigration services when it comes to DACA and naturalization. So there's a lot of great partnerships for any of you in the room to think about. There's a lot of these great agencies that have this funding to provide immigration services. How could we partner up with them? And then lastly, one of my main roles at the United Farm Workers Foundation is leading a national network of farm worker serving organizations. We call it the Si Se Puede network. And it's really to provide a national infrastructure to maximize our collective impact. If you do get the slides, we put up some immigration resources. Highly recommend this first website called adminrelief.org. It's meant for people like you. It's not really meant for the community, but on this website, you'll find sample presentations, toolkits, one-pagers on what's going on, most up-to-date immigration information on there. We're hoping to put more videos that could be used to maybe put up on community spaces. There's also a readycalifornia.org page. On this page, you'll find a lot of the local events that our Ready California partners are putting on in providing immigration legal services. And then lastly, sisepuede.org if you want to find out, if you want to refer the community to a Spanish-speaking, a Spanish website on immigration, that I would highly recommend our website. And then USCIS stands for the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. They're the branch that will actually be implementing these programs or are implementing DACA and citizenship. So they're essentially the source for everything that I shared with you. So if you want to see materials from the source, that's the place to go. Want to wrap it up with that, and then I'm going to hand it over to Miko Osada. She's with the El Cajon Library in San Diego County. And one quick story I wanted to share with you all. We were lucky enough to participate in focus groups. So we had community members. A foundation was able to get community members into a focus group to talk about, different issues that affect them. But one of the questions that were asked in these focus groups are, who do you trust in your communities? Who would you get information from and, not really question it? And again and again, we heard libraries. The community does trust libraries. The community sees libraries as a reliable source. So I'm really happy to be doing this presentation with the libraries, and hand it over to Mika to share with us what the libraries are doing.